You put your hands on that girl one more time, Sheriff, and that badge won't be enough to save you. He slapped a waitress across the face in front of a packed diner, a full crowd Sunday morning. Coffee still steaming, just to prove that nobody in Raven Creek could touch him. The whole room froze. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. But the sheriff made one mistake he'd regret for the rest of his life. He never noticed the gray-bearded man in the corner booth, leather cut, calm eyes, president of the local Hells Angels. And he just watched everything. Before we begin, subscribe, follow Emily's story all the way to the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The sound of that slap didn't fade the way most sounds do. It hung there. It stayed in the air of Miller's diner like it had nailed itself to the walls, and for 3 full seconds, not one person in that room made a single sound. Emily Carter's head had snapped to the left. Her hand came up to her cheek on instinct slow, like she couldn't quite believe her own face was there. A strand of blonde hair had come loose and fallen across her eye. She didn't push it away. She just stood there, coffee pot still in her right hand, the amber liquid trembling against the glass. "Now," Sheriff Richard Hayes said, and his voice was calm. That was the worst part. It was so calm. "You want to try that little attitude with me again?" Emily didn't answer. She couldn't. 31 years of learning how to disappear had taught her exactly one thing, and that thing was screaming at her right now. Don't say a word. Lower your eyes. Apologize. Make yourself small and let it pass the way it always passes. I asked you a question." Hayes took a step closer. The floorboards under his boots creaked. "I'm a patient man, Emily, but I do not like being corrected, especially not by the help." Somewhere behind the counter, old Ruth 64 had been cooking at Miller's for 20 years, set down her spatula. She didn't turn around. Nobody turned around. 15 people in that diner, and every single one of them had suddenly found something fascinating to look at in their own coffee cups. That was Raven Creek. That was how it worked. You saw nothing. You said nothing. You went home. Emily felt the heat rising in her cheek where his hand had landed. She felt something else too. Something she hadn't felt in years. Something she'd buried so deep, she'd almost forgotten it had a name. But she still didn't speak. Not yet. "Good girl," Hayes said, and he smiled, and he reached out and patted her stinging cheek twice gently, like she was a dog that had finally learned to sit. "That's better. Now pour me my coffee like I asked, and we'll pretend none of this ever happened." And it should have ended there. That's the thing everyone would say later. It should have ended right there with Emily pouring the coffee and Hayes drinking it and the whole town going right on being afraid of him the way it had always been afraid of him. Except a chair scraped across the floor in the far corner. Just one chair, slow, unhurried. The sound of a big man in no particular rush getting to his feet. Hayes turned his head. The man in the corner booth was maybe 55, maybe 60. Silver in his beard, silver at his temples, a face like weathered leather. He wore a black vest over a gray shirt, and across the back of that vest, though Hayes couldn't see it yet, were the words that everyone in 3 counties knew by heart. He'd been sitting there the whole time, quiet, nursing black coffee and a plate of eggs he'd barely touched. Cole Anderson, everybody called him Grim, president of the Raven Creek Charter of the Hells Angels. And right now he was looking at Sheriff Richard Hayes the way a man looks at something he's already decided about. "Sit down, old man," Hayes said. "This doesn't concern you." Cole didn't sit down. He walked. 3 easy steps, and he stopped maybe 4 feet away, close enough that Emily could smell coffee and road dust and something like cold air off a mountain. "Sheriff," Cole said. His voice was low and even. "Why don't you tell me what she did?" Hayes let out a short laugh. "Excuse me. You put your hand across a woman's face in front of 15 people," Cole said. "So I figure she must have done something real bad. Robbed you maybe? Pulled a knife? Something that'd make a grown man in a uniform decide the right move was to slap a waitress." He tilted his head. "So go on, tell me what she did." The diner had gone from silent to something deeper than silent. Ruth had turned around now. So had the trucker at the counter. So had the young couple in the window booth, who'd stopped mid-breakfast with their forks halfway to their mouths. Hayes's jaw tightened. "She got smart with me. Got smart with you." Cole nodded slowly, like he was really considering it. "How'd she do that exactly?" Hayes stopped, And in that stop, everyone heard it. Everyone heard the truth of it. Because there wasn't an answer. There wasn't anything Emily Carter had done except maybe not smile fast enough, or maybe not refill his cup before he asked, or maybe just exist in a way that Richard Hayes had decided on this particular Sunday morning that he didn't care for. You know what Hayes said, and his hand drifted toward his belt, toward the badge, toward the gun beside it. I don't answer to you. I don't answer to anybody in this room. You want to make this your business? Fine. I'll haul you out of here in cuffs and let you spend the night in a cell figuring out what a mistake that was. You could do that, Cole agreed. I could. On what charge? I'll think of one. Hayes smiled again, and it was ugly this time. That's how it works around here. You've been in my town long enough to know that. And there it was, out loud, in front of everybody. My town. The thing everyone believed and nobody ever said. Emily was staring at Cole now. She didn't even know she was doing it. This stranger, this man she'd served coffee to maybe a dozen times without ever exchanging more than a nod, he was standing between her and the most feared man in Raven Creek, and he wasn't afraid. He wasn't even a little afraid. She'd forgotten people could be like that. Here's what I know about towns, Cole said quietly. I've ridden through about 1,000 of them, and there's always a man like you in each one. Always. A fella with a little bit of power who decided a long time ago that a little bit was the same thing as all of it. And you know what happens to men like you, Sheriff? Hayes's hand closed around the grip of his sidearm, not drawing it, just holding it, a promise. What happens, he said through his teeth. Sooner or later, Cole said, somebody stops being afraid, and once one person stops, it's like a window cracks. Then two people stop. Then the whole town remembers and outnumbers you about 400 to 1. He glanced just briefly at Emily, then back. You want to know the mistake you made this morning, Richard? It wasn't slapping her. Bad men slap people every day and get away with it. Your mistake was doing it in front of a room full of witnesses and then telling every one of them out loud that you own this place. He shook his head slowly. You just handed all these good folks the one thing they were missing. And what's that? Permission, Cole said. For a long moment, nobody moved. Hayes's hand stayed on his gun. Cole's hand stayed loose and open at his sides. And Emily realized her own heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Then Hayes did the math. You could actually watch him do it. 15 witnesses, a phone or two maybe already recording, a man in a Hell's Angels cut standing 4 feet away unarmed and unbothered, and a badge that only meant something as long as everybody agreed it meant something. He let go of the gun. This isn't over, Hayes said, and he jabbed a finger toward Cole's chest without quite touching it. You and me, this isn't close to over. No, Cole said, I don't expect it is. Hayes turned to Emily, and for just a second, just one, his mask slipped, and she saw what was underneath it. Not anger, something colder, something that had already started planning. You should have kept your mouth shut, he told her softly so only she and Cole could hear. You had a nice quiet life. You had a talk, bab. You want to see what happens to people who embarrass me? Keep it up. He straightened his hat. Keep it right up, sweetheart. Then he walked out. The little bell over the door jingled, cheerful and stupid, and the door swung shut behind him, and through the window they all watched him climb into his cruiser and sit there for a moment just looking back at the diner before he pulled away. The whole room let out its breath at once. Lord have mercy, Ruth said from behind the counter. Lord have mercy. Emily was still holding the coffee pot. Her hand had finally stopped shaking, but only because Cole had reached out and very gently taken it out of her grip and set it down on the nearest table. You okay, he asked her. Quiet, just for her. And that simple question, you okay, nearly broke her more than the slap had, because she couldn't remember the last time somebody had asked it and actually waited for the answer. I'm fine, she said automatically. It was the thing she always said. She'd said it 10,000 times. I'm fine, it's nothing. Don't worry about me. Cole looked at her. He didn't argue. He just looked at her the way you look at somebody when you both know they're lying and you're going to let them lie because that's their right, but you want them to know you know. That was a real dumb thing you just did, Emily heard herself say. You know that. You just made an enemy out of the worst man in this town. For me. For a waitress you don't even know. I know your coffee's terrible, Cole said. Does that count? A laugh came out of her before she could stop it. Half a laugh cracked right down the middle, more like a some wearing a laugh as clothing. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. "My name's Cole," he said. "I know who you are," Emily said. "Everybody knows who you are. Grimm, president of the, she gestured vaguely at his vest. "You're not exactly a secret. And you're Emily Carter, 31, been working here about 6 years, live in the little blue house out on Cedar Road, the one with the crooked mailbox." He said it plainly, no threat in it, just fact. "I notice things. It's a habit." She stared at him. "How do you—" "Because you're the only person in this diner who refills my coffee before I ask," Cole said. "Every time, never says a word about it. Been doing it for 2 years. He shrugged. "You pay attention to the people who pay attention to you. Not many folks pay attention to a man like me, or a woman like you from what I just saw." Emily's eyes stung. She looked away, blinking hard, furious at herself. She did not cry in front of people. She hadn't cried in front of a soul in longer than she could count. Crying was what got you noticed, and getting noticed was what got you hurt. And she'd built her entire quiet, careful, invisible life around the single principle of not getting hurt. And a stranger in a leather vest had just torn a hole in all of it in about 90 seconds. "You need to leave now," she said. "You need to get on your bike and ride out of Raven Creek and forget any of this happened. Because that man does not forget. Do you understand me? Richard Hayes does not forget. He'll come after you. He'll come after your people, whatever you call them." "Club," Cole said. "He'll come after your club. He'll find something. He'll make something up. That's what he does. I've watched him do it to people for years." Her voice dropped, and the fear in it was old, worn, smooth, like a river stone. "I watched him do it to a man named Danny Rourke 2 years ago. Danny said something at a town meeting Hayes didn't like. 6 weeks later, Danny lost his business, his license, his everything. And you know what everybody did? Everybody said Danny must have done something. Because it's easier. It's so much easier to believe the person who got destroyed deserved it than to believe the man who destroyed him could do it to you next." Cole listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You know a lot about this," he said. "I know enough to be scared." "That's not what I said." Cole pulled out the chair beside them, turned it around, and sat down backward on it, folding his arms across the top. "I said you know a lot about this, about Danny Rourke, about how it works, about the timeline, 6 weeks, the license, all of it." He looked at her steadily. "How come a woman who spent 6 years keeping her head down and staying invisible knows the exact anatomy of how Richard Hayes destroys somebody?" And Emily went very still. "Because he'd found it. Just like that. This stranger had sat down and in under 2 minutes put his finger on the exact thing she had never told a single living soul in Raven Creek." "I don't know what you mean," she said. "Yeah," Cole said gently. "You do." Ruth was watching them from behind the counter now, pretending to wipe down a surface that was already clean. The couple in the window booth had gone back to their breakfast, but slower now, quieter, stealing glances. The trucker had left. The bell over the door jingled as 2 new customers came in and stopped short, sensing something in the air they couldn't name. Emily lowered her voice until it was barely more than a breath. "He didn't just walk into my diner today and lose his temper," she said. "That's what everybody thinks they saw. Some hothead sheriff who got embarrassed and slapped a waitress." She swallowed. "That's not what happened." "Then tell me what happened." "He came here for me," she said. "He's been coming here for me for 3 weeks, every few days. Sits at that counter, orders coffee, he doesn't drink, and every time he leans in close and he says the same thing. He says, 'I know who you are, Emily. I know where you came from. And if you ever open your mouth about what you know, I will bury you so deep they'll need a map to find the pieces.'" Cole didn't move, but something changed in his face. Something behind the calm went very quiet and very focused, like a still pond the moment before something breaks the surface. "What do you know, Emily?" he asked. And there it was, the question she had spent 2 years running from, the question that had made her memorize how to disappear, how to smile, how to pour coffee before it was asked for, and never, ever, ever say the wrong thing to the wrong person. Emily Carter looked at the door where Sheriff Richard Hayes had just walked out. She looked at the corner booth where a stranger had risen to his feet for her when nobody else in 6 years ever had. She looked at Ruth, at the couple in the window, at the whole small, frightened world of Raven Creek that had spent its entire existence looking away. And she felt that thing again, the thing she'd buried, the thing she'd almost forgotten had a name. 2 years ago, she said slowly, before I was a waitress, I worked at the county records office. Filing, data entry, the kind of job nobody notices, which is exactly why I got it. Her hands had started to tremble again, but not from fear this time. From something closer to the edge of a cliff she'd been standing on for 2 years. And one afternoon, Richard Hayes had me pull some files, property records, seizure documents. He thought I was too small to matter, too quiet to understand what I was looking at. But you understood, Cole said. I understood, Emily whispered. I understood exactly what I was looking at, and I made a copy. God help me, I don't even know why I did it. Instinct, maybe? But I made a copy of every single page and I put it somewhere safe, and I have never told one soul it exists. She looked up at him, and her eyes were wet and burning, and for the first time in 2 years, absolutely steady. Sheriff Hayes didn't come here today because I got smart with him, Cole. He came here today because 3 weeks ago, he finally figured out that the quiet little waitress at Miller's Diner is the same woman who used to file his paperwork. And he knows that I know. He just doesn't know if I kept anything. The whole diner seemed to lean in, though nobody moved an inch. And now, Emily said, he slapped me in front of 15 people to remind me what happens if I ever tell. A tear finally slipped free and ran down the cheek that still burned red from his hand, and she let it fall, and she did not look away from Cole Anderson's steady gray eyes. So you tell me, Grim, you tell me, was standing up for me still worth making him your enemy because you didn't just defend a waitress this morning? She wiped her face with the back of her hand. You defended the one person in this whole town who can put Richard Hayes in prison, and now he knows you're standing next to her. For a long moment, Cole Anderson said nothing at all. Then he stood up slow and easy, and he set the chair back the way he'd found it, and he pulled a worn leather wallet from his vest and laid 2 20s on the table for a $9 breakfast. Emily, he said, what time do you get off work? 6, she said. Why, Jim? Because at 6 o'clock, Cole said you and me are going to go get those files, and then we're going to sit down and you're going to tell me everything from the beginning, and I mean every last word of it. He picked up his gloves off the table. That man out there thinks he just scared you back into being quiet. He thinks he won this morning. He pulled the gloves on one finger at a time. He didn't. He just woke you up. And in about 6 years of walking through this town with your eyes down, I don't think Richard Hayes ever once stopped to wonder what would happen the day you finally looked back up. Emily stood there, the red mark still on her cheek, her heart pounding, 2 years of silence, cracking open inside her chest like ice on a spring river. 6 o'clock, she said. 6 o'clock, Cole agreed. And behind the counter, Ruth, who had heard every word, who had worked at Miller's for 20 years, and looked away just like everybody else, every single time reached under the register, pulled out her cell phone, and quietly began to type a message to her sister, whose husband had lost his hunting license to Richard Hayes 3 summers back. The window Cole had talked about was already starting to crack. And none of them, not Emily, not Cole, not Ruth, and least of all the sheriff sitting in his cruiser 2 blocks away, gripping his steering wheel and staring at nothing, had any idea yet just how far the whole thing was about to break wide open. Orchestrated emotional narrative continuation with dialogue-driven pacing and strategic climaxes. The message Ruth sent to her sister said only 6 words. You're not going to believe this one. But by the time Emily untied her apron at 6 o'clock that evening, those 6 words had already traveled to 4 other phones, and each of those to 4 more, and something in Raven Creek that had been holding its breath for years had finally started very quietly to exhale. Emily didn't know any of that yet. What she knew was that her hands wouldn't stop shaking as she hung her apron on the hook by the kitchen door, and that Ruth was watching her with an expression she'd never seen on the old cook's face before. You're really doing this, Ruth said. It wasn't a question. I don't know what I'm doing, Emily admitted. That man out front on the motorcycle, you trust him. Emily paused with her hand on the hook. I don't trust anybody, Ruth. You know that. That's not what I asked. Emily looked out through the pass-through window. Cole was leaning against his bike in the parking lot, arms crossed, patient as a stone, and 2 more men in leather cuts had shown up while she'd finished her shift and were standing a respectful distance away, not crowding, just present. Just there. I trust him more than I trust staying quiet, Emily said finally. That's all I've got. Ruth reached out and grabbed her wrist. Her grip was stronger than it had any right to be for a woman her age. Then you listen to me, girl. 20 years I've worked in this diner. 20 years I've watched Richard Hayes walk in here like he owns the floor under my feet. In 20 years I looked away, same as everybody. Her voice cracked. My sister's husband lost his hunting license because he wouldn't sell Hayes a piece of land Hayes wanted. You know that, course you don't. Nobody knows, because we don't talk about it. We just look away and thank God it wasn't us. Ruth. I'm done looking away, Ruth said. You go get whatever it is you got, and when the time comes when it comes, and it will, you find me. I've got things to say too. I've had them bottled up for 20 years and I am tired, Emily. I am so tired of being tired. Emily stared at her. In 6 years, Ruth had never said more than 100 words to her at a stretch, and most of those were about the fryer. Okay, Emily whispered. Okay. Ruth let go of her wrist and turned back to her grill, and her shoulders were shaking, but her voice was steady. Now get out of here before I start crying into the hash browns. The drive to Emily's little blue house on Cedar Road took 11 minutes. Cole rode ahead of her, and the two other men he introduced them only as Tank and Reyes rode behind, and Emily kept checking her rearview mirror the whole way, half expecting to see a cruiser's lights, half expecting the whole thing to fall apart before it started. It didn't. She pulled into her gravel driveway with the crooked mailbox, and Cole swung off his bike and pulled his gloves off, finger by finger, and for a second the two of them just stood there in the fading light. Where is it? Cole asked. You're gonna laugh. I don't laugh much. It's in the wall, Emily said, behind the water heater. I cut out a piece of drywall 2 years ago and put everything inside a lockbox and patched it back over. I check the seam every couple weeks to make sure nobody's touched it. She let out a shaky breath. I've had nightmares about that lockbox. I've woken up at 3 in the morning, convinced he'd found it, and I've never told anybody it exists until this morning. Until you. Cole nodded slowly. Then let's go get it. Inside it took 20 minutes and a utility knife to open the seam Emily had patched so carefully that even Cole, running his fingers along the wall, couldn't find it until she showed him exactly where. The lockbox was gray metal dented at one corner, and Emily's hands were trembling so badly she couldn't get the key in the lock. Here, Cole said gently, let me. He held the box steady while she turned the key. And when the lid came up, Cole Anderson looked inside, and for the first time all day, his calm cracked. Emily saw him, he said quietly. Do you know what you've got here? I know it's bad. No. Cole lifted out a stack of paper in his hand, a hand that had ridden through storms and stared down men far more dangerous than Richard Hayes was not entirely steady. Bad is a word for a lot of things. This isn't bad. He looked up at her. This is a career. This puts him in a federal prison. Do you understand? Not county, federal. Emily sat down hard on the edge of her bathtub. What is it I mean? I know it's property seizures. I know he was taking people's land, but I filed it. I didn't read all of it. Then let me tell you what you filed. Cole spread the pages out on the bathroom counter, moving fast now, his eyes scanning line after line. Civil asset forfeiture. That's when a cop seizes your property claiming it's connected to a crime. Legal technically if it's done right. But this, he tapped a page. These are seizures with no arrests, no charges, no convictions. He'd seize a man's land, a man's truck, a man's savings, and then he'd file paperwork saying the case was pending investigation, and then the investigation would just never happen. The property would get sold, and the money. He stopped. The money, Emily prompted. Cole, the money went where? Cole set down the page he was holding and picked up another one, and Emily watched his jaw tighten. Shell Company, he said. There's an LLC here. Raven Creek Asset Recovery. Sounds official, doesn't it? Sounds like a county agency. It's not. It's a private company. And I'd bet you every dollar I've got that if we pull the incorporation records, we find Richard Hayes' name on it, or the name of somebody who does exactly what Richard Hayes tells him to do. He looked at her. He wasn't just abusing his power, Emily. He was stealing, systematically, for years. He built a machine that let him take whatever he wanted from anybody he wanted, and he laundered it all through a company with a name that sounds like it works for the government. The bathroom was very quiet. That's why he came for me, Emily said slowly. That's why the coffee, The threats. It was never about me getting smart with him. It was about the fact that you're the only person alive who touched this paperwork and might have kept a copy, Cole finished. You're not a witness to a bad temper, Emily. You're a witness to a crime, a big one. And this morning when I stood up in that diner, I wasn't defending a waitress who got slapped. He looked at the papers, then at her. I was defending the woman holding the one thing that can end Richard Hayes forever. And he watched me do it. Emily pressed her hands over her mouth. The full weight of it landed on her all at once. Not the fear she'd carried for 2 years, which had been a low, steady hum, but something sharper and colder. Because up until this moment, she'd been able to tell herself a story. The story was maybe it's not that bad. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe if I just stay quiet forever, it goes away. That story was dead now. Cole had just killed it with a stack of paper on her bathroom counter. He's going to kill me, she said, not dramatically, flatly, like she was reading a weather report. You know that, right? A man doesn't build all of this and then let the one person who can prove it just walk around town serving him coffee. The only reason I'm alive is he wasn't sure I kept anything. And now he's not going to be sure of anything, Cole said, which is exactly why we're not going to give you time to figure it out. Emily looked up. What do you mean? I mean, the worst thing we could do right now is sit on this. Cole was already gathering the pages, squaring them into a neat stack. You've had this for 2 years and you've been safe because he didn't know it existed and you never used it. That balance is gone. He slapped you this morning because he's testing you, pushing to see if you'll break, if you'll run, if you'll cry to somebody. He's trying to find out how scared you are so he knows how fast he needs to move. Cole slid the papers into the inside of his vest. We take the choice away from him. We move first. Move where Cole, he is the law here. Who do we even take this to? The county? He owns the county. The state police, half of them go hunting with him. Not everybody's in his pocket, Cole said. Nobody's got that many pockets. There's always a crack, always somebody who hates him, but was too scared to move alone. He paused. And that somebody, once they hear one other person's willing to stand up, sometimes that's all it takes. You keep saying that. Permission, windows cracking. That's a nice speech, Cole. But Danny Rourke stood up and Danny Rourke lost everything, and now Danny Rourke pumps gas 2 towns over and won't even say the man's name. Danny Rourke stood up alone, Cole said. You won't be. And that was when Emily's phone buzzed. She looked down at it. An unknown number. A text. She almost didn't open it. But something made her thumb move and the message loaded, and she felt all the blood drain out of her face. Cole. He was at her side in a second. What? She turned the phone so he could see. The text was 3 lines. I know he was at your house. I know you talked to him at the diner. Whatever you think you have, Emily, you don't have anything. Burn it, and this all goes away. You have until tomorrow. Someone who's trying to help you. He's watching your house, Cole said flatly. Or somebody is. Emily's voice had gone thin. How does he, Cole? How does he already know? We've been here 20 minutes. We didn't tell anybody. And then a terrible thought crossed her face, and Cole watched it happen, watched her turn slowly and look toward her own front window. Ruth texted her sister, Emily whispered, at the diner this morning. I saw her do it. And her sister, Ruth's sister, is married to a man who lost his hunting license to Hayes in small towns Cole. Small towns talk, 1 text becomes 10, becomes... She pressed her hand to her forehead. Oh God, what if it got back to him? What if somebody in this town who's still loyal to him heard that the waitress from Miller's was talking and ran straight to... Stop. Cole put a hand on her shoulder firm. Breathe. You don't know that's what happened. And even if word got around, that's not all bad. Not all bad. He knows I'm talking. He's threatening me tonight. Which means, Cole said slowly, he's scared. Emily stopped. Think about it. Cole held up the phone. A man who's certain he's won doesn't send a text at 8 o'clock at night begging you to burn the evidence. He doesn't say this all goes away. He doesn't offer you a deal, Emily. You offer somebody a deal when you're not sure you can just crush them. He set the phone down. This message isn't a threat. Well, it's dressed up like one. But underneath it, this is a man who just realized he might not be able to fix this the easy way, and he's terrified. He's showing you his fear and calling it strength. just like he did this morning with that slap. Emily stared at the phone. He's scared, she repeated. He is petrified, Cole said. And am I wrong? And a scared man makes mistakes. This text is his first one, because now we know he's watching. Now we know he'll move fast, and now, Cole almost smiled. Now we know he doesn't actually have anything on you. If he did, he'd have used it. Instead, he's asking you nicely to make his problem disappear. That's not the move of a man holding cards. That's the move of a man who's bluffing and praying you can't tell. Something shifted in Emily's chest. It was small, but it was real. For 2 years, Richard Hayes had lived in her head as something almost supernatural, an all-seeing, all-knowing force that could destroy her the moment he chose. And Cole had just in about 4 sentences turned him back into a man. A frightened, cornered man sitting somewhere in the dark, hoping a text message would save him. Okay, Emily said. Okay, so what do we do? First thing, Cole said, you don't answer that text. Not yes, not no, not nothing. Silence scares a scared man worse than anything you could say. He picked his gloves up off the counter. Second thing, you're not staying here tonight. Cole, I can't just... Emily. His voice was quiet, but there was no giving it at all. A man is watching your house. He just told you so. You are not sleeping here tonight, and that is not up for a discussion. Pack a bag. You can stay with... His phone rang. Cole answered it with a short, yeah. He listened, and Emily watched his face change again, watched the calm come down over it. That stillness that she was starting to understand meant something serious was happening underneath. Say that again, Cole said. Slow. He listened. When? A pause. Who told you? A longer pause. Right, all right. Don't do anything. Don't call anybody. I'm coming to you. He hung up. What? Emily said. What is it? Cole put the phone back in his vest, and when he looked at her, there was something new in his eyes. That was Reyes, he said. You remember Danny Rourke? The man who stood up 2 years ago and lost everything. The one you said pumps gas 2 towns over and won't say Hayes' name. Yeah, Emily said carefully. Reyes just talked to him. Cole paused. Danny Rourke wants to meet. Emily's mouth went dry. What? How does Danny Rourke even... It's been 20 minutes. How does the whole... Because Ruth's text didn't just get back to Hayes, Cole said. It got back to everybody. And most of the people it got to aren't loyal to Richard Hayes, Emily. Most of the people in this town hate him. They're just alone. Or they were. But this morning, for the first time in years, somebody in this town stood up in a public place and told him no, and now the whole town's phone is lighting up with the same 6 words over and over. You're not going to believe this one. Cole shook his head slowly. Danny Rourke heard the waitress from Miller's stood up to Hayes and didn't get crushed on the spot. And 2 years of being too scared to say the man's name just cracked wide open. He wants to meet. Tonight. And Emily. He stopped. What? She said. What, Cole, what? Danny says he's not the only one. Cole's voice was very low. Danny says there's others. People Hayes robbed. People Hayes ran out of business. People who lost their land, their money, their trucks, their savings all through that same company. Raven Creek Asset Recovery. Danny knows the name too, Emily. He's known it for 2 years. He's been sitting on his own little piece of the puzzle, too scared to do anything with it, exactly like you. Cole took a breath. You thought you were alone. You thought you were the only one who knew. You've spent 2 years believing you were the last person standing between Richard Hayes and everything he built. Emily could barely breathe. You were never alone, Cole said. You just couldn't see the others. They were all standing in the dark exactly like you, each one holding their own little piece. Each one thinking they were the only one. Each one too scared to strike a match. He held up the papers from her wall, and tonight 1 match got lit in a diner, this morning, by you. Emily sat down on the edge of the tub again because her legs had stopped holding her. Danny's got a piece, she said faintly, and Ruth's got a piece, and Ruth's sister, and her husband, the hunting license. Well, and I'd bet money there's 20 more, Cole said. Oh, it's again, 50, 100. A man doesn't run a machine like this for years without leaving pieces scattered across half the county. He was safe because none of the pieces knew about each other, because everybody was too scared to compare notes, because as long as each person believed they were the only one, they'd stay quiet and their little piece was useless on its own. He crouched down in front of her so they were eye to eye. But your piece isn't like the others, Emily. The others have grudges, memories, stories. Those matter a lot when you stack them all up. But he tapped the papers. You've got the machine itself, the seizure records, the company name, the paper trail. You're the one piece that turns all their stories into a case. He stood up, which is exactly why he came for you and nobody else. He can survive 100 angry people telling stories. He cannot survive 100 angry people telling stories while you stand next to them holding the proof. Emily looked up at him, and for the first time since that slap had rung across the diner that morning, something rose up in her that was bigger than the fear. It had been buried under 6 years of looking down, under 2 years of nightmares about a lockbox in the wall, under a whole lifetime of learning how to make herself small. But it was still there. Cole had seen it that morning before she had. He'd called it by its name. Courage. Okay, she said, and her voice didn't shake this time. Then we go meet Danny Rourke. You sure? No, Emily said. I'm terrified. But I've been terrified for 2 years, Cole, and it never once kept me safe. So I might as well be terrified in doing something. She stood up, and this time her legs held her. Where does he want to meet? Reyes is setting it up. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere Hayes doesn't have eyes. Cole checked the window again, just a glance careful. But first we get you a bag packed, and first we get you out of this house, because whoever sent that text is... Headlights swept across the front window. Both of them froze. The light slid across the wall. Little slow, deliberate. A vehicle pulling up out front and stopping. Not passing by. Stopping. And through the thin curtains, Emily could just make out the shape of it. Long, low, and a bar across the top that could only be one thing. Cole, she whispered, that's a cruiser. Cole moved fast and quiet, killing the bathroom light, putting himself between Emily and the front of the house without seeming to think about it. How many doors in this place? Front and back. Cole? Tank and Reyes are still outside, he murmured. 2 of my people are in your driveway right now, and Hayes knows it. He's not going to do anything stupid with witnesses sitting on your lawn. But his hand had gone to his side, and Emily noticed, and Emily understood, and her heart was hammering. Stay behind me. Don't say a word unless I tell you to. A car door opened and closed. Boot steps on gravel. Slow, unhurried. The exact same unhurried Emily had heard that morning, right before a hand crossed her face. Then a knock at the door. 3 raps, polite almost, and a voice muffled through the wood that turned to Emily's blood to ice. Emily, Sheriff Richard Hayes called out pleasantly. Emily, honey, I know you're home. I can see the truck belongs to your motorcycle friend right there in your driveway. A pause. Why don't you open up? I just want to talk. Neighbor to neighbor, no trouble. Cole put his mouth close to Emily's ear. Is your back door locked? Yes. Cole, what do we... Nothing, Cole breathed. We do nothing. We don't open it. He's got no warrant. If he had one, he'd have kicked the door in, not knocked. He's fishing. He wants to see your face. He wants to see how scared you are. His hand found her shoulder in the dark. Don't give it to him. The knock came again. Softer this time. Then Hayes's voice in the pleasantness had thinned just slightly, and underneath it Emily could hear the thing that Cole had told her was there all along. The fear wearing a costume. Emily, I sent you a message earlier, a friendly one. I was trying to help you. A pause. You've got yourself mixed up in something you don't understand, sweetheart. This man on your porch, this club, they're using you. You know that. They don't care about you. They're going to use you to get at me. And when it goes bad, and it will go bad, they'll ride off and leave you holding it all, just like they left Danny Rourke. Emily's breath caught. Cole felt it, and his grip tightened, a warning, a steadying. Don't answer. That's right. Hayes went on, and now there was something almost gentle in his voice, something coaxing, and it was somehow the most frightening thing yet. I know about Danny. I know he called somebody tonight. Word gets around fast in a town like this, doesn't it? Faster than you'd think. A long pause. Here's what I know, Emily. I know you're a good person who made a mistake this morning by not walking away, and I'm a forgiving man. So I'm going to give you one chance. You open this door, you hand me whatever it is you think you have, and I will personally make sure nothing ever happens to you. You'll keep your job. You'll keep your quiet little life. And all of it just goes away. Silence. Hayes said, and the gentleness dropped off his voice entirely, and what was underneath was flat and cold and patient. You can keep listening to a man in a leather vest who's known you for one day, and you can find out what happens to people in my town who choose wrong. Cole and Emily stood in the dark, not moving, not breathing. Then out in the driveway, another voice. Loud, easy, unbothered. Evening, Sheriff. It was Tank. Nice night, you need something. A pause on the porch. This doesn't concern you, son. See, that's funny, Tank drawled, because that's the exact thing you said to Cole this morning, and it turned out to concern him quite a bit. We're just going to sit right here and keep Miss Emily company. You go on and have a good night now. And Emily heard something she never in 2 years thought she'd hear. She heard Richard Hayes hesitate. The costume was slipping. He'd come here expecting a frightened woman alone in the dark who would open the door and hand over her life to make the fear stop. Instead, he'd found leather-clad men in the driveway who wouldn't move a locked door that wouldn't open, and a silence on the other side of it that gave him nothing at all to work with. You're all making a mistake, Hayes said finally, and his voice had gone tight. Every one of you. You think you understand what you're standing in the middle of. You don't. You have no idea. A pause. Emily, last chance. Open the door. Emily closed her eyes, and then in the dark, in a whisper so quiet only Cole could hear it, she made the choice she'd been running from for 2 years. No, she breathed. She didn't say it to the door. She said it to herself. She said it to the version of herself that had learned to disappear, that had poured coffee before it was asked for, that had kept her eyes down and her mouth shut in a lockbox buried in the wall. She said it to 2 years of nightmares. And saying it out loud, even in a whisper, even where Hayes couldn't hear, it was like a hand releasing a grip on her throat that she'd forgotten was even there. On the porch, Hayes waited. 10 seconds, 20, a full minute. The door did not open, and finally they heard the bootsteps retreat across the gravel. The car door, the engine, and the cruiser pulled away, headlights sweeping back across the wall one more time before the room went dark and quiet and still. Emily let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 2 years. You did it, Cole said quietly. I didn't do anything, I just didn't open a door. Emily. Cole turned the light back on and looked at her, and there was something like respect in his weathered face. You just told Richard Hayes no. Twice in one day. That's twice more than anybody in this town has managed in a decade. He put the papers back inside his vest. You feel that thing in your chest right now. Emily pressed her hand to her sternum. Her heart was still pounding, but underneath the fear, there was something else, something warm and fierce and completely unfamiliar. Yeah, she said, I feel it. That's the thing he's been trying to slap out of you for 3 weeks, Cole said. And you just found it again in the dark, standing behind a locked door with him 10 feet away. He picked up her packed bag off the bed and slung it over his shoulder. Now, Danny Rourke's waiting, and unless I miss my guess by the time we get there, Danny's not going to be the only one. Emily looked around the little blue house on Cedar Road, the house where she'd hidden for 2 years, the house where she'd had all those nightmares, the house where a sheriff had just stood on the porch and begged her to give up. She wasn't afraid of it anymore. Or she was, but the fear had stopped being in charge. Then let's not keep them waiting, she said, and she walked out her own front door with her head up for the first time in 6 years, and Cole Anderson walked beside her and Tank and Reyes fell in behind them. And somewhere across town, Richard Hayes sat alone in his cruiser, gripping the steering wheel, staring at a text message he'd sent that had gotten no reply, feeling for the very first time the thing he had spent his entire career making sure other people felt instead of him. He was starting to be afraid. And 2 towns over in the back room of a gas station that smelled like motor oil and burnt coffee, a broken man named Danny Rourke, who hadn't said the name Richard Hayes out loud in 2 years, was pacing a small circle, wringing his hands, working up the nerve to say a whole lot more than that, and he wasn't alone in that room either. 3 other people had shown up when they heard, then a 4th, then a 5th pulled into the lot. Each one had spent years believing they were the only one. Each one had come because of 6 words on a phone and 1 woman who wouldn't open a door. The window Cole had talked about that morning hadn't just cracked. It was shattering. The gas station 2 towns over had a back room that Danny Rourke used to store cases of oil and antifreeze. And when Emily walked into it that night, with Cole beside her, the first thing she noticed was that Danny Rourke could not stop moving his hands. He was a lean man, maybe 45, with the kind of face that had once been handsome before something wore it down. He was wringing a shop rag between his fingers, twisting it, untwisting it, and when he saw Emily, his eyes went wide and wet. "You're her," Danny said. "You're the waitress from Miller's." "Emily," she said. "Emily Carter." "You stood up to him." Danny's voice cracked on the words. "This morning, in front of everybody, you stood up to Richard Hayes and you're still walking around." He looked at Cole, then back at her, and something in his face broke open. Do you have any idea how long I've waited to hear that anybody, stood up to that man and didn't get flattened?" "Danny," Cole said gently, "sit down, breathe, tell us what you know." But Danny didn't sit down. He couldn't. 2 years of silence was pouring out of him all at once, and there was no stopping it now that the plug had been pulled. "2 years ago, I owned a body shop," Danny said. "Best in the county. I built it from nothing. 22 years I built that place." His hands twisted the rag. "And then Hayes wanted the land, not for the county, for himself. There was talk of a highway expansion coming through and my lot was going to quadruple in value, and Hayes knew it before anybody. So he came to me and he offered to buy it. Lowball. Insulting. And I said no." "And then," Emily said quietly. "And then?" Danny laughed, and it was an awful sound. 6 weeks later, a state inspector shows up, says there's a complaint, says I'm dumping chemicals, which is a lie, which is a flat lie. 22 years, I never dumped so much as a quart of oil where it didn't belong. But the inspectors got paperwork, and the paperwork says otherwise. And you know who signed the complaint that started the whole thing?" "Hayes," Cole said. "Hayes," Danny nodded. "They pulled my license, shut me down. And while I was fighting it, while I was spending every dime I had on lawyers who kept telling me it was hopeless, Hayes seizes the property. Says it's part of an environmental investigation. Says the contamination makes it county business. And then, real quiet, real slow, the property gets sold. To a company. Raven Creek Asset Recovery." Danny's voice dropped. "You know that name, don't you? I saw it in your face when I said it. You know that name too." "I know it," Emily said. "I've got the incorporation trail, the seizure records, all of it." Danny Rourke stopped moving. For the first time since she'd walked in, his hands went still. "You've got proof," he whispered. "I've got proof." And Danny Rourke, 45 years old, a man who'd built something from nothing and watched it taken from him and spent 2 years too broken to even say the name of the man who did it. Danny Rourke put his face in his hands and started to cry. Emily crossed the room without thinking about it. 6 years of learning to keep her distance from people. 6 years of making herself invisible. And she crossed the room and put her hand on Danny Rourke's shoulder and she said, hey, you're not alone anymore. You hear me? Neither of us is." "I've got the inspection report," Danny said into his hands. "The fake one, I kept it. My lawyer said it was worthless without proof, it was fabricated, but I kept it anyway. I don't know why. I couldn't throw it away." He looked up, his eyes red. Does it matter? Does any of it matter?" "It matters," Cole said, and there was iron in his voice. "It all matters. On its own, your report's a piece of paper a lawyer can wave away. But next to her seizure records, next to that company name showing up in both, Danny, your worthless piece of paper just became a link in a chain." That was when the door opened, and the woman who came through it made Emily's breath catch. "Ruth," Emily said. The old cook from Miller's stood in the doorway, and behind her were 3 more people. Emily half recognized from around town faces she'd served coffee, to faces she'd nodded at, faces she'd never really looked at because looking at people got you noticed. "I told you I had things to say," Ruth said. "Well, so do they." She jerked her head at the people behind her. "This is my sister Carol. That's her husband Pete, the hunting license you remember. And that fella there is Marcus Webb. He used to run the hardware store on Main before Hayes decided he wanted the building." Marcus Webb, a heavy-set man with sad eyes, raised a hand. 12 years I ran that store. Then a code violation nobody could ever quite show me. Then a fine I couldn't pay. Then a seizure." He looked at Emily. "Raven Creek Asset Recovery bought my building at auction for 1/3 of what it was worth. Ruth said you might know something about that." The room had gone very quiet, and Emily looked around it at Danny with his fake inspection report at Pete, with his hunting license at Marcus, with his lost hardware store at Ruth, who had looked away for 20 years and was done looking away, and she felt something enormous settle over her. She was not the only one. She had never been the only one, and every single person in this room had spent years believing they were. Okay, Emily said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. Okay, I need everybody to understand something. Every one of you, every single one of you has been carrying a piece of this. Alone, alone. And alone each piece is just a sad story that Hayes can wave away, same as he's been waving them away for years. That's how he stayed safe. He made sure none of us ever stood in the same room. She looked at Cole. But we're in the same room now. So what do we do with it? Marcus asked. We got a room full of grudges and a woman with a lockbox. That's not going to scare Richard Hayes. He's got half the county in his pocket. He's got the DA. He doesn't have everybody, Cole said. I told Emily that this morning, and I'll tell all of you now. Nobody's got that many pockets. There's always a crack, and I think I might know where it is. Everybody looked at him. There's a federal angle here, Cole said. That company, Raven Creek Asset Recovery, it's been buying seized property and reselling it across state lines. Some of that land got flipped to buyers in Idaho, Wyoming. That's interstate commerce. That's not county. That's not even state. He let it sit for a second. That's the FBI. The word landed in the room like a stone in a pond. The FBI, Danny repeated faintly. I know a man, Cole said. Federal agent. Retired now, but he's still got friends who aren't. Years ago, long story, doesn't matter, he did right by somebody in my club when nobody else would. I called him from the road tonight before we got here. Cole looked around at all of them. He's interested, real interested. A crooked sheriff running a forfeiture scheme that crosses state lines is exactly the kind of thing that makes a federal career. But he needs something. He can't open a case on grudges and gas station meetings. He needs a witness with documents. He needs a paper trail. Cole looked at Emily. He needs you. Emily's mouth went dry. He wants to meet you, Cole said. Tomorrow. He wants to see what you've got. And if it's what I think it is, if it's what I saw in that lockbox tonight, then this stops being a bunch of scared people in a back room. It becomes a federal case. For a moment, nobody said anything. And then Pete Rue's brother-in-law, the quiet man who'd lost his hunting license, spoke up for the first time. They'll come after us, Pete said. You know that, right? All of us. The second Hayes finds out we're talking to the feds, he's going to do everything he did to Danny, to Marcus, to all of us, but worse. He'll burn every one of us down. He looked around the room. I got a family. I can't lose everything the way Danny did. I need everybody to be honest about what we're walking into here. The fear came back into the room. Emily felt it. She watched it move across their faces one by one, and she understood it completely because she'd lived in it for 2 years. It was the fear that had kept every one of them silent. The fear that whispered, you're the only one you can't win. Stay quiet, stay small, keep your head down. And she understood in that moment that this was the real fight. Not Hayes, not the paperwork. This, the fear in the room right now threatening to send everybody back into the dark. Pete, Emily said. He looked at her. You're right, she said. He'll come after us, every one of us. I'm not going to stand here and tell you it's safe because it's not, and you'd know I was lying. She took a breath. But I need you to understand something because I've been where you are for 2 years longer than you have. I have had that lockbox in my wall for 2 years. And every single night I told myself the exact thing you're telling yourself right now. Stay quiet, stay safe, don't be the one who stands up. Her voice caught. And you know what it got me? It got me 2 years of nightmares. It got me a sheriff who figured out who I was and started coming to my work to threaten me over coffee. It got me a slap across the face in front of 15 people. She looked around the room. Staying quiet didn't keep me safe, Pete. It just meant I suffered alone. It just meant I gave that man 2 more years to do to other people what he did to Danny. And I am done. I would rather stand up and lose than sit down and rot for 1 more day. The room was silent. But I'll tell you something else, Emily went on, and now her voice was gaining strength, feeding off something she hadn't known was in her. This morning I thought I was alone. I have thought I was alone for 2 years. And then a man I barely knew stood up in a diner for me, and by tonight there are 8 of us in a room and there's a federal agent who wants to meet me tomorrow. 8 of us, Pete. And I promise you we're not the last 8. There's more out there. There's dozens more sitting in the dark right now, exactly like we were, each one thinking they're the only one. She pointed at Danny's inspection report on the table at the papers Cole had brought from her wall. Alone were grudges. Together were a case. And the only thing that's kept Richard Hayes safe all these years is making sure we never found each other. She looked around at every face. Well, we found each other. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Ruth stepped forward. I'm in, she said flatly. 20 years I looked away. I'm not doing it another day. Whatever that federal man needs, I'll tell him. I saw Hayes threaten a supplier in my own diner 4 years ago. I'll swear to it. I'm in, Danny said, and his hands had finally stopped shaking. God help me. I'm in. I'm in, Marcus said. Carol nodded. Then slowly Pete looked at his wife, and his wife looked back at him, and something passed between them, and Pete let out a long breath. For my kids, Pete said. I don't want them growing up in a town run by a man like that. I'm in. And Emily felt her throat close up because 6 years ago she'd have given anything to belong to something like this. And instead she'd spent that whole time making sure she belonged to nothing and nobody. And now here it was a room full of frightened people who decided to be brave together. Then it's settled, Cole said quietly. Tomorrow we meet the federal man. Emily brings the documents. Everybody else stays quiet, stays normal, doesn't tip Hayes off. We move careful and we move fast. He looked at Emily. You still got a place to stay tonight because you sure as hell aren't going back to Cedar Road. She can stay with me, Ruth said immediately. I got a spare room and a shotgun, and I'd purely love to see somebody try to come through my door. That got a laugh out of the room, a real one, the first of the night, and it broke the tension like a window thrown open in a stuffy room. But it didn't last, because that was when Danny Rourke's phone buzzed on the table, and he glanced at it, and the color drained out of his face so fast that Emily's stomach dropped before he even said a word. Danny, Cole said, what is it? Danny didn't answer. He just turned the phone around so the room could see. It was a photo, and it took Emily a second to understand what she was looking at, and then when she did understand, the whole room went cold. It was a photo of the gas station, from the outside, taken from across the road in the dark just minutes ago. You could see the lit-up windows. You could see the shapes of the motorcycles parked out front. And under the photo was a single line of text from an unknown number. Nice meeting. Tell Emily I said hi. He's here, Marcus breathed. He followed us. Or he had somebody follow us. He knows we're all in this room together. Everybody stay calm, Cole said, but his voice had changed, gone sharp and low, and he was already moving toward the small window. Calm. Pete was on his feet. He's got a photo of all of us. Together, this is exactly what I said Woody knows every face in this room. Now he'll... Pete! Emily grabbed his arm. Pete, look at me. Look at me. She waited until his panicked eyes found hers. He wants you to panic. That's what this is. That's the whole point of that photo. He didn't come in here and arrest us, did he? He didn't kick the door down. He took a picture from across the road and sent a text like a schoolyard bully because a picture and a text is all he's got. He's trying to scare us apart before we get to that federal agent tomorrow because he knows that once we do, it's over for him. Cole was peering out the window. She's right. There's a vehicle across the road. Lights off, but it's just sitting there. He turned back. He's not making a move. He's watching. He's hoping the fear does his work for him, same as it always has. He sent the same kind of text to me tonight, Emily said, at my house, right before he showed up on my porch and begged me to hand over the evidence. Beg Cole. You said it yourself. A man who's winning doesn't beg. And a man who's winning doesn't sit in the dark across the road taking pictures of a gas station. He does that because it's the only thing he's got left. Slowly, the panic in the room began to ebb. So what do we do? Marcus asked. We finish what we came here to do, Cole said. We stay the course. Tomorrow, Emily meets the agent. And tonight, he glanced at the window again. Tonight, nobody goes home alone. We ride out together. We peel off in different directions. We make it real hard for one man in one car to follow 8 people to 8 different places. Tank Reyes and the rest of us will make sure everybody gets where they're going safe. He looked at Emily and there was something in his face, pride maybe, or something close to it. You handled that, he said quietly, so only she could hear. That panic in the room just now. You put it down before it could spread. 3 days ago, you couldn't look a customer in the eye. Tonight, you talked 8 scared people back from the ledge. He shook his head. You keep surprising me, Emily Carter. I keep surprising myself, she admitted. Her heart was still pounding, but underneath it, that warm, fierce thing was still burning brighter than ever. Cole, can I ask you something? Ask. Why? She searched his face. Why are you doing this? Really, you barely know me. You barely know any of these people. You walked into a diner 3 days ago for eggs and coffee, and now you've made an enemy of the most dangerous man in the county. You've called in a federal agent. You're putting your whole club at risk for what? For strangers. She shook her head. Cole, men don't do this, not in my experience. In my experience, men see somebody getting slapped and they look at their coffee and they wait for it to be over. That's what people do. So why didn't you? Cole was quiet for a long moment, and when he answered, his voice was lower than she'd ever heard it. Because 40 years ago, he said, there was a girl who got treated the way you got treated this morning, and a whole room full of people looked at their coffee and waited for it to be over. And nobody stood up. He looked down at his hands, and that girl was my sister Emily. And by the time anybody in that town decided to do something about the man who was hurting her, it was too late. It was 2 years too late. He looked up and his gray eyes were wet, and Emily understood suddenly that this calm, unshakable man had been carrying his own lockbox in his own wall for 40 years. I've spent my whole life riding through towns full of people looking at their coffee, and every single time I see it happen, I see her. So no, I don't walk away. Not anymore. Not ever again. The room had gone silent. Everyone had heard. Emily didn't know what to say, so she did the only thing that felt right. She reached out and took Cole Anderson's hand, the way she'd taken Danny's shoulder, the way this whole broken circle of people had somehow started reaching for each other after years of reaching for nobody at all. Then we do this for her too, Emily said softly, for your sister. We do it for everybody who ever had a room full of people look away. Cole squeezed her hand once hard and then let go and cleared his throat and became the president of the Raven Creek Hells Angels, again calm and command ready. All right, he said to the room. Everybody knows the plan. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, the meeting happens. Emily brings the documents. Danny, you bring that inspection report. Marcus, whatever paper you've got on the hardware store. Pete, Carol, Ruth, you come ready to tell the truth about what you saw. We do this together, and we do this right, and this time tomorrow. Richard Hayes wakes up to find out that the town he thought he owned has been quietly building a case against him for 2 years, and he never saw it coming. He picked up his gloves. Now let's ride. And they rode. 8 vehicles pulled out of that gas station lot in 8 different directions, the motorcycles splitting off to shield them. Engines roaring into the night, and the single car across the road couldn't follow. All of them. Couldn't even choose which one to follow, and by the time it pulled onto the road, it had already lost them all. Emily rode in Ruth's old truck, watching the taillights scatter across the dark county roads like sparks off a fire. And for the first time in 2 years, for the first time maybe in her whole life, she did not feel alone. She felt like part of something. She felt for the first time she could remember like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. And somewhere behind them, alone in his car, Richard Hayes watched the last set of taillights disappear and understood finally fully what Cole Anderson had told him in the diner 2 days before. The window had cracked, and once one person stops being afraid, it's like a window cracks and then 2 people stop and then the whole town remembers it, outnumbers you 400 to 1. It wasn't 8 people in that gas station he had to worry about anymore. It was who those 8 people would tell. And who those people would tell. He had built his whole kingdom on the certainty that the scared stay silent and the silent stay alone. And in the space of 2 days, a quiet waitress he'd slapped to prove a point had taken that certainty and set it on fire. His hands were shaking on the steering wheel. He noticed it and he hated it, and he could not make it stop. For the first time in 20 years, Richard Hayes drove home through his own town, feeling like a stranger in it, and he understood that tomorrow everything he'd built was going to start coming down, and there was a real and terrible chance that there was absolutely nothing left he could do to stop it. The federal agent's name was Raymond Cordell, and he was nothing like Emily had pictured. She'd expected a suit, a badge, a cold official manner. Instead, the man who sat across the table from her at 10 o'clock that morning was in his 60s, wore a flannel shirt and reading glasses, and had the tired, patient eyes of a man who'd spent 30 years watching powerful people get away with things. "So you're the waitress," Cordell said, and there was no condescension in it, just curiosity. "Cole here has told me a little, but I want to hear it from you. Slow. From the beginning. So Emily told him. She told him about the records office 2 years ago, about the files Hayes had her pull, about the moment she'd understood what she was looking at, and made a copy she couldn't explain even to herself. She laid the documents out on the table one by one, and she watched Raymond Cordell's tired eyes change as he went through them, watched 30 years of patience sharpen into something else entirely. "Miss Carter," Cordell said quietly after a long time, "do you understand what you're showing me? Cole said it puts him in federal prison." Cole undersold it. Cordell took off his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I've been chasing men like Richard Hayes my whole career. Crooked cops running forfeiture scams. And you know what the hardest part always is? It's never the crime. The crime's easy. The hard part is proof. These men are careful. They keep the paper clean. They make sure the one person who could sink them is too scared to talk." He put his glasses back on and looked at her. "And here you are, the one person, with the paper, not scared anymore." He shook his head slowly. "In 30 years, Miss Carter, I have never once had a case walk in the door this clean. Never." Emily felt something swell in her chest. "But," Cordell said, and the word landed hard, "I have to be straight with you. All of you." He looked around at the others, Danny Marcus, Ruth Pete Carroll, gathered in the small room. "The moment I open this case, the clock starts. And Richard Hayes is not a stupid man. He's going to feel it coming. And a cornered man with power does dangerous things. So I need to know right now, before I make a single phone call, are you all prepared for what happens next? Because once I start, I can't stop it. And neither can you." The room was silent, and then one by one they answered. Danny first, then Marcus, then Ruth, then Pete, then Carol, and finally Emily. "Open the case," Emily said. Cordell looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded and reached for his phone, and that was the moment Emily would think about it for the rest of her life. That was the exact moment the machine Richard Hayes had built for years began finally to grind into reverse. But Cordelli had been right about one thing. Hayes felt it coming. They didn't know how. Maybe he had somebody inside the county building who tipped him. Maybe it was just the animal instinct of a predator who'd stayed on top for 2 decades by smelling danger before it arrived. But by that afternoon, before Cordell had even finished the paperwork to formally open his investigation, Richard Hayes made his move. Emily's phone rang while she was still at Ruth's house. It was a number she didn't recognize, and she almost didn't answer, but something made her thumb hit the button. "Emily Carter." A woman's voice. Frightened. Rushed. "You don't know me. My name's Sandra. I work dispatch at the sheriff's office. Oh God, I shouldn't be calling you. I could lose my listen." "Listen to me. Hayes just left. He took 2 deputies and he's headed for the gas station. Danny Rourke's gas station. He's got some kind of warrant. He's saying Danny's got stolen property on the premises. He's going to..." Her voice broke. "I heard him on the phone. He said if he can't stop the paper, he'll stop the people. He's going after Danny first, to scare the rest of you into backing off. You have to warn him. You have to..." The line went dead. Emily was already moving. "Cole?" He came out of the kitchen, fast, reading her face before she said a word. "What?" "Hayes is going after Danny, right now. Some fake warrant, stolen property. He's taking deputies to the gas station." Emily's hands were shaking as she tried to call Danny. "He's not calling. First Cole, he's not. He said if he can't stop the paper, he'll stop the people. He's going to make an example out of Danny to scare everybody else off before Cordell can..." "Call Danny, now." Danny's phone rang once, twice, 3 times, and Emily's stomach dropped further with every ring because Danny always answered. Danny had barely put his phone down since last night. "Emily," Danny's voice tight low, "I can't talk. There's cop cars pulling into my lot. 3 of them. Hayes is getting out. Danny, listen to me. Do not let him inside. Do you hear me? Whatever he says, whatever warrant he waves you, do not open that door, and you do not say one word without a lawyer. Cole and I are coming. We're coming right now." "Emily, he's got a warrant. He's holding it up against the glass." "It's fake, Danny. There's no stolen property in your shop, and you know it. He's fabricating it. Same as he fabricated the inspection 2 years ago. It's the exact same play." Emily was in the truck. Now Cole beside her, the engine already turning over. "He's trying to arrest you on something made up so the rest of us panic and back off. Do not give him what he wants. Do not resist. Do not run. Do not say anything. Just make him wait for us. We're 8 minutes out. There was a long, terrible pause on the line. Danny, Emily said. Danny, talk to me. Okay, Danny said finally, and something in his voice had changed, hardened. Okay, you know what? 2 years ago, I opened the door. I let him in, and I answered every question, and I trusted the system, and it took everything I had. A breath. Not this time. This time he can stand in my parking lot and wait, and I'm going to get my own phone out, and I'm going to record every second of it. Yes, Emily said fiercely. Yes, record everything. Everything he says, Danny. The truck tore down the county road, Cole driving hard and fast, and behind them the roar of engines as Tank and Reyes and 3 other members of the club fell in because Cole had made a single phone call and the whole charter had answered. Emily gripped the door handle and watched the road blur past and prayed they'd make it in time. Cole's phone rang. He answered it on speaker without slowing down. Cordell. Cole, the federal agent's voice urgent. I just got word Hayes is moving on one of your people. That true Danny Rourke right now. Fake warrant stolen property he's about to plant if he hasn't already. That's obstruction. That's witness intimidation in a federal investigation. Cordell's voice had gone hard as flint. That's exactly the kind of stupid panicked move that turns a strong case into an airtight one. Listen to me, get there. Keep it calm, keep it documented, and do not let anybody do anything that gives him an excuse. He wants a confrontation. He wants somebody to swing at a deputy so he can spin it. Don't give it to him. A pause. I'm making calls. If Hayes lays a hand on that man on camera while he's a known witness in a federal case, I will personally see to it that it's the last thing he ever does with that badge. They came around the last bend, and there it was, the gas station, and 3 sheriff's cruisers parked crooked across the lot, and Richard Hayes standing at Danny Rourke's locked front door with a paper in his hand, and 2 deputies behind him, and Danny visible through the glass, phone up, recording, refusing to open. Cole brought the truck to a hard stop, and Emily was out before it had fully quit moving. Sheriff. Every head turned. Hayes turned, and when he saw Emily Carter striding across the lot toward him, head up, no fear in her face, the club rolling in behind her, something flickered across his features that she had never seen there before. Uncertainty. Well, Hayes said, recovering, forcing the old smile. If it isn't the whole circus, Emily, you're interfering with the execution of a lawful warrant. You want to spend the night in a cell too. What's the warrant for, Sheriff? Emily stopped 10 feet from him. Her voice carried across the whole lot. Say it out loud. Say it nice and clear. Danny's recording and so am I. She held up her own phone, and so are they. She nodded at the club members, half of whom had phones up now. So go ahead. Tell everybody what Danny Rourke stole. Tell us what's in that gas station that gives you the right to be here. Hayes' jaw worked. Stolen auto parts. We got a tip. A tip, Emily repeated. From who? That's confidential. Like the environmental complaint 2 years ago was confidential. Emily took a step closer. Like the code violation on Marcus Webb's hardware store was confidential. Like the anonymous report that took Peter's hunting license. Her voice was rising, ringing, and she could see the 2 deputies behind Hayes glancing at each other, now shifting on their feet. You've got a pattern, Richard. Everybody who ever tells you no gets a confidential tip 6 weeks later, and you know what people are finally starting to notice. That's enough, Hayes snapped. No, Emily said. It's not. It's not nearly enough. It's 2 years' worth of not enough. She turned to the 2 deputies deliberately and pitched her voice to them. You two, you want to know why you're really here. You want to know what warrant you're actually serving. There's a federal agent named Raymond Cordell who opened an investigation into Richard Hayes this morning. Federal, FBI, and Danny Rourke is a witness in that investigation. And your sheriff just brought you 2 out here to intimidate a federal witness on camera. She let that hang. So I'd think real hard if I were you about whose orders you follow in the next 60 seconds. Because when this all comes down, and it's coming down, I was just following the sheriff is not going to keep you out of it. The 2 deputies went pale. Don't listen to her, Hayes barked. She's lying. There's no federal. Cole's phone buzzed. He looked at it, then held it up. Deputies, Agent Cordell would like a word. He's on the line right now. You want to talk to him yourselves, confirm it's real. He took a step forward, phone extended. Go on, he's waiting. And that was the moment it broke. The younger of the two deputies, a kid really maybe 25, took a step back from Hayes. Just one step. But everybody saw it. "Sheriff," the young deputy said, his voice unsteady. "Is that true? Is there a federal—" "Get back in position," Hayes roared. "Is it true, sir?" The kid's voice cracked. "Because you told us this was a routine warrant. You didn't say anything about a federal. If this man's a federal witness, we can't. That's obstruction. Sir, that's a felony. You said—" "I said, get back in position." But the second deputy had already lowered his hand from his belt. And in that small motion, in that quiet refusal, Emily watched something enormous happen. She watched the exact thing Cole had described in the diner 3 days ago. Once one person stops being afraid, it's like a window cracks. She had just watched the crack reach all the way inside the sheriff's own department. "You two are done," Hayes said, and his voice had gone shrill. "You hear me? Done. I'll have your badges." "No," the young deputy said quietly. "No, sir, I don't think you will." And he took another step back. And then he did something that made the whole lot go silent. He reached up and he unclipped his body camera and he held it out toward Emily. "It's been recording the whole time," the young deputy said. "Everything he said, everything he had us do. I want it on the record that I want no part of this." His hand was shaking, but his voice was steady. "My name's Deputy Tyler Brooks, and I've been sick to my stomach for 8 months about the things I've watched this man do. I didn't think there was any way to stop him." He looked at Emily. "Until you stood up in that diner. My cousin was there. She told me. She said the waitress from Miller's told Richard Hayes no. And I've been waiting 3 days to find the guts to do the same thing." Emily took the body camera from his shaking hand. "And Richard Hayes, Sheriff, Richard Hayes, who had walked through his town for 20 years, like he owned the ground under everybody's feet, who had built a kingdom on the certainty that fear kept people silent and silence kept people alone. Richard Hayes stood in the parking lot of a gas station and watched his own deputies turn their backs on him and understood that it was over. But a cornered man is the most dangerous man there is. "You want to play this game?" Hayes said, and his voice had dropped into something low and vicious, all the false charm gone now. Fine, let's play." He turned to Emily and his hand drifted toward his belt, toward the gun, the way it had in the diner. "You think a body camera and a stack of papers scares me? You think some retired Fed 100 miles away? Scares me. I am the law in this county, and I have been for 20 years, and I will be long after all of you are. Richard," Cole's voice cut across the lot, calm as still water. "Take your hand off that gun." Hayes's eyes snapped to him. "There's 9 phones pointed at you right now," Cole said quietly. 2 of your own deputies just quit. Danny Rourke's been recording since before you got here. Every word you've said, every threat you've made is on 9 different cameras, and it's already uploading to 9 different places. You draw that weapon, and you will not be a corrupt sheriff who cut some corners. You will be a man who pulled a gun on unarmed citizens in a parking lot on camera, and I promise you, no badge in the world walks you back from that." Cole took one slow step forward. "So take your hand off the gun. It's done, Richard. You know it's done. The only question left is how much worse you want to make it for yourself." For a long, terrible moment, nobody moved. And Emily watched Richard Hayes' face. She watched 20 years of certainty crack apart behind his eyes. She watched him look at the phones at the deputies who'd abandoned him, at Danny in the window at Cole, standing calm and immovable at her, at the quiet waitress he'd slapped to prove he was untouchable, standing in front of him now, with his own deputy's body camera in her hand and no fear left in her face at all. And she watched his hand come off the gun. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. He just stood there and his shoulders came down, and for one strange moment he looked less like a monster and more like what he actually was, a frightened, cornered man who had finally run out of people to frighten. "You had a whole town scared of you," Emily said quietly. She wasn't gloating. There was no triumph in her voice, just a kind of sad wonder. "For 20 years, and you know what it turns out, you were the whole time, Richard. Just a man, just a scared man who figured out that if you keep people alone and afraid, they'll never realize how many of them there are." She shook her head slowly. "That's all it ever was. And the second we stood in the same room, the second we counted each other, you were finished. You were always going to be finished. It just took one person being brave enough to be first." Cordell's voice came through Cole's phone, still on speaker, cutting through the silence. "State police are 12 minutes out," the agent said. Federal warrants are being drawn up as we speak. Sheriff Hayes, I'd strongly advise you to stay right where you are. Keep your hands where those cameras can see them and not say another word. Because everything you say from this point forward, I promise you, is going to matter a great deal. And Richard Hayes, for the first time in 20 years, did exactly as he was told. The state police did arrive 12 minutes later, and by then a small crowd had gathered people from town who'd heard who'd gotten the text, who'd driven out to the gas station 2 towns over to see with their own eyes the thing they'd been told could never happen. They stood at the edge of the lot, quiet, watching as the state troopers spoke with the Cordell on the phone as they reviewed the footage as they walked toward Richard Hayes. And Emily stood beside Cole and Danny and Ruth and all the others, holding Deputy Tyler Brooks's body camera in her hand, and she watched the most powerful man in Raven Creek get walked to a state police cruiser with his hands behind his back. She thought she'd feel triumphant. She'd imagined this moment 1,000 times in 2 years of nightmares, and in the imagining, she'd always thought she'd feel some kind of savage joy. She didn't. What she felt instead, standing there watching, there was something quieter and much deeper. She felt the 2 years of fear finally lift off her shoulders. She felt the weight of that lockbox in the wall gone at last. And more than anything, she felt the people standing around her, Danny, who'd found his voice again. Ruth, who was done looking away. Pete, who'd stood up for his kids. Young Deputy Brooks, who'd finally found the guts to match hers. And Cole, who had walked into a diner for eggs and coffee and instead had reached back 40 years and finally saved his sister. "You okay?" Cole asked her quietly. The same question he'd asked in the diner 3 days ago. And this time, Emily didn't say "I'm fine" on instinct. This time she thought about it. This time she looked at the answer honestly. "Yeah," she said, and her voice was steady and true. "You know what? For the first time in a real long time, I actually am." Cole nodded slowly, and something like a smile touched the corner of his weathered face. Behind them, the state cruiser carrying Richard Hayes pulled out of the lot and onto the county road. And the small crowd of townspeople watched it go, and nobody looked at their coffee, and nobody looked away. They all watched, every single one of them, right until it was gone. The arrest was only the beginning. Emily learned that fast because in the days that followed, the thing that had started with one slap in a diner turned into something none of them could have imagined. The story got out. Of course it got out. In a town like Raven Creek, where a single text had reached the whole county, in an afternoon, the news that Richard Hayes had been walked to a state cruiser in handcuffs traveled at the speed of light. But this time the story didn't come with fear attached. This time it came with something else, something the town hadn't felt in 20 years. Permission. Cole had used that word in the diner on the very first morning, and now Emily watched it come true in real time. Because the moment people learned that Hayes was in custody, that the untouchable man had in fact been touched, the dam broke completely. They came to Ruth's house first. Then when there were too many for Ruth's living room, they came to the diner. Miller's, where it had all started, where Emily had been slapped, became the place where the whole town finally started to talk. "I've got something," an old rancher named Gil told Emily on the second day, turning his hat in his hands the same way Danny had turned his shop rag. "Hayes took 40 acres off me in 2009. Said it was a lien. Wasn't any lien. I never told a soul because who was I going to tell he was the law?" He swallowed hard. "But if you're really doing this, if it's really safe now, I want to tell that federal man everything." "It's not safe," Emily told him honestly, because she'd promised herself she'd never lie to make things easier. "I won't tell you it's safe, Gil, but you won't be alone. That's the only thing I can promise. You won't be alone." And that turned out to be enough. For Gil and for the ones who came after him. Because it had never been about safety, not really. It had been about being alone. Every single person Hayes had robbed had believed for years that they were the only one, and that belief was the wall that kept them silent. And once Emily Carter had knocked one brick out of that wall in a diner on a Sunday morning, the whole thing came down. By the end of the first week, Raymond Cordell had 31 witnesses. By the end of the second, he had 53. Miss Carter, Cordell told her over the phone, and she could hear the weariness and the wonder mixed together in his voice. "In 30 years of doing this work, I have never seen anything like what's happening in your town. People are lining up, lining up. Do you understand how rare that is? Usually I have to drag witnesses in kicking and screaming, terrified, and half of them recant before trial." But your people, he paused, your people are showing up on their own, with documents, with dates, with records they kept for years and never dared use. It's like a whole town decided to remember its own history all at once. They're not my people, Emily said. Miss Carter, Cordell said gently, yes, they are. You may not have asked for it, but when you stood up in that diner, you became the person they had all been waiting for. That's not a thing you can give back. That's just a thing that happened. The federal case against Richard Hayes grew into something enormous. Raven Creek Asset Recovery, the shell company, turned out to be exactly what Cole had guessed on Emily's bathroom floor that first night. A machine running for over a decade that had funneled millions of dollars in seized property and cash into accounts Hayes controlled through a web of relatives and cronies. The interstate land flips gave the FBI jurisdiction. The seizure records Emily had kept gave them the spine of the case, and the 53 witnesses gave them the flesh and blood, the human cost story after story of what one man's greed had done to one small town. But it wasn't smooth. Emily learned that too, because a man like Hayes doesn't go down without swinging even from a cell. The threats started in the third week. Anonymous calls to Ruth's house where Emily was still staying. A brick through the diner window one night with no note because no note was needed. Two of the witnesses got cold feet after a man they didn't recognize sat outside their houses in a parked car for an afternoon. Hayes still had loyalists, not many, but enough people who'd profited alongside him, people who stood to lose everything if he went down, and they were frightened and cornered and dangerous. And there was a night about a month in when Emily nearly broke. It was late, and she was alone in the diner after closing counting the register, and the phone rang, and when she answered it, a voice she didn't know said 6 quiet words. "We know where your mother lives." Emily set the phone down with a hand that had gone numb. Her mother 3 states away, who had nothing to do with any of this, who didn't even know what her daughter had gotten into. And in that moment alone in the dark diner, every bit of the old fear came flooding back all at once, and Emily felt herself start to fold, felt the old voice rise up, "Stay quiet, stay small, make it stop, you can still make it stop." And then the bell over the door jingled. It was Cole. He'd taken to checking on her at closing, and he took one look at her face and crossed the room in 3 strides. "What happened?" he said. She told him, and she watched his face harden and then strangely soften. "Emily." He pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, the same way he had that first morning. "You want to quit? Right now. I can see it in your face. Somebody just threatened your mama, and every part of you is screaming to make it stop, to hand it all back, to go quiet." He nodded slowly. "That's not weakness. That's the most natural thing in the world. So I'm going to tell you what I told myself 40 years ago when I was too scared to help my sister, and I've regretted it every day since." Emily waited, barely breathing. "The fear doesn't go away because you give in," Cole said quietly. "That's the lie it tells you. It says just stop, just be quiet, and I'll leave you alone. But it won't. It never does. You give Richard Hayes your silence tonight, and tomorrow he wants your testimony recanted, and the day after that he wants you to say you made it all up, and it never ever ends, because a man like that is a bottomless pit, and your fear is the only thing feeding him." He leaned forward. "The only way out, the only way is straight through. You call Cordell right now. You report that threat. You put it on the record, and you make that phone call the 54th nail in his coffin instead of the thing that saved him." He held her eyes. "Your mama's safest in a world where Richard Hayes is in prison, not in a world where he learned that threatening her works." Emily looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up the phone and called Raymond Cordell. And the threat against her mother, the thing that was meant to break her, became instead witness, tampering, a federal crime layered right on top of everything else. And it was the moment the FBI decided Hayes was too dangerous to leave loose even on the strict bail he'd been fighting for. Within 48 hours, a federal judge revoked his bond entirely. Richard Hayes went back to a cell, and this time he stayed there. The threats to the witnesses didn't stop overnight, but something had shifted. Because now when a strange car parked outside somebody's house, that person didn't sit alone in their living room with the lights off, terrified. They called Emily, and Emily called Cole, and within 20 minutes there were motorcycles parked on the street and members of the club sitting on the porch drinking coffee, and the strange car always drove away. The club never touched anybody. They never had to. They just made sure that nobody in Raven Creek who'd found the courage to speak ever had to feel alone in the dark again. "You know what you built?" Cole asked her one evening months into it as they sat on Ruth's porch watching the sun go down. "You didn't just take down a crooked sheriff, Emily. You took the thing he used against everybody, the being alone, and you turned it inside out. You made it so nobody in this town has to be alone again." "We built it," Emily corrected. "You were there from the first minute." "I stood up in a diner," Cole said. "That's all I did. One time. You're the one who's shown up every single day since." He shook his head. "There's a difference between the person who lights the match and the person who keeps the fire going. I lit a match. You've been keeping this whole town warm for 3 months. The trial, when it finally came, took 9 days. Emily testified on the 3rd. She'd been dreading it for months, the thought of sitting in a courtroom of Richard Hayes staring at her from the defendant's table of a lawyer, trying to twist her words and paint her as a liar, the way Hayes had painted Danny 2 years before. She'd had nightmares about it. She'd woken up at 3 in the morning more than once, heart pounding, sure she'd freeze on the stand, sure she'd fold. But when the day came and she raised her right hand and she looked out across that courtroom, she saw Danny Rourke in the second row, and Ruth beside him, and Marcus, and Pete, and Carol, and Gil, and Deputy Tyler Brooks, and 20 other faces from a town that had spent 20 years looking at its coffee and had finally looked up. And Cole in the back and his leather-cut arms crossed steady as a mountain. She wasn't alone. She was never going to be alone again. So she told the truth. All of it. From the records office 2 years ago, to the lockbox in the wall, to the slap in the diner, to the body camera in her hand in the gas station parking lot. She told it calmly, clearly, without anger and without fear, and when Hayes's expensive lawyers stood up to tear her apart, he found there was nothing to tear, because Emily Carter had stopped being the frightened, hideable woman who could be made to look like the problem. She was just a person telling the truth, and the truth, it turned out, was the one thing Richard Hayes had never figured out how to control. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found him guilty on all 34 counts. Emily was in the courtroom when the verdict was read, sitting between Cole and Ruth, and when the foreman said the word guilty, the first time she felt Ruth's hand grip hers hard, and by the 4th or 5th count, Ruth was crying, and by the 10th half, the courtroom was, and Emily herself sat there very still, with tears running down her face, and did not make a sound. Richard Hayes was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. 22 years. Emily did the math later, and the number stopped her cold. 22 years was almost exactly how long Danny Rourke had run his body shop before Hayes destroyed it. It was how long Marcus Webb had kept his hardware store. It was near enough how long Richard Hayes had ruled Raven Creek by fear. The man who had taken decades from other people was going to give decades back, and there was a kind of justice in that arithmetic that Emily would think about for the rest of her life. But the story didn't end in the courtroom. Emily was clear about that later whenever anyone asked. The verdict wasn't the ending. The ending was what the town did after. Because a town that has been ruled by fear for 20 years doesn't just heal because one man goes to prison. The habits of fear run deep. People had learned over 2 decades to keep their heads down, to not make waves, to distrust each other, to assume that anyone who stood up must have done something to deserve what happened to them. That kind of damage doesn't undo itself. So Emily went to work on it. She hadn't planned to. She'd only meant to survive. But somewhere in those 3 months, sitting on Ruth's porch and taking phone calls from frightened people and driving out to sit with witnesses who were losing their nerve, she discovered something about herself that 6 years of hiding had kept buried. She was good at it. She was good at finding the one frightened person in a room and making them believe they weren't alone. Maybe because she'd been that person for so long. Maybe because she knew exactly what the fear felt like from the inside and exactly what words could reach through it. The diner where she'd once felt invisible became the place people came to for help. Not just with Hayes that was finished, but with all of it. The tangled aftermath, the property Hayes had stolen and how to claim it back, the reports to file, the lawyers to find, the neighbors who'd been turned against each other by 20 years of a man who profited from keeping them divided. Emily sat in those diner booths for hours, day after day, and she listened and she connected people, and slowly, one conversation at a time, she helped a whole town remember how to trust itself again. "You ever think about doing this for real?" Cordell asked her near the end when the federal case was finally wrapping up. "Victim advocacy. There's whole organizations that do what you've been doing in that diner." They'd hire you in a heartbeat. You've got a gift, Miss Carter. A rare one. You make people brave. Emily thought about it for a long time, and then she said no. There's plenty of towns out there with their own Richard Hayes, she told him, and plenty of people better suited than me to go chasing after them. But this is my town. These are my people now, whether I planned on it or not. She looked out the diner window at Main Street at the hardware store. Marcus had gotten back at the people walking by with their heads up. Somebody's got to stay and help them remember. Might as well be the waitress who started the whole thing by refusing to pour a cup of coffee. Cole, who was sitting in the corner booth, his booth, the one he'd been sitting in that first morning, laughed out loud at that. It was one of the few times Emily ever heard him really laugh. There it is, he said. There's the woman who told Richard Hayes no. Emily kept her job at the diner. She never did leave. But it wasn't the same job, and she wasn't the same woman, and Miller's wasn't the same place. It became over the following year a kind of unofficial heart of the town, the place where people came when they were scared, when they were stuck, when they needed to remember that they weren't alone. Emily poured coffee, same as always. But now, when she set a cup down in front of somebody with worry in their eyes, she'd sit down across from them for a minute and she'd say, "Tell me what's going on," and she'd mean it. Deputy Tyler Brooks, the young man who'd handed her his body camera in the gas station parking lot, became a sheriff's deputy again. Under the new sheriff, the county elected that fall, a decent, plain-spoken woman who'd run on a single promise, which was that no badge in Raven Creek would ever again mean a man was above the law. Brooks stopped by the diner most mornings for coffee. He always tipped too much. He never quite got over what Emily had given him that day, which was the same thing Cole had given her, the proof that one person refusing to be afraid could crack a wall that had stood for 20 years. Danny Rourke got his body shop back. It took the better part of a year and a mountain of legal filings, but the property was returned, and the day he reopened, half the town showed up, and Emily stood in the crowd and watched a broken man become whole again in front of her eyes. Danny gave a little speech that he'd clearly rehearsed and clearly forgot the second he opened his mouth, and what he ended up saying instead, looking straight at Emily, was just 2 years I couldn't say his name. And then a waitress said no in a diner, and I got my life back. That's the whole story. That's everything. Ruth kept cooking at Miller's. She was going to keep cooking at Miller's, she announced, until the day she died, and God help anybody who suggested she retire. But she smiled more now. She looked 20 years lighter. The weight of 2 decades of looking away was gone, and it showed in her face, and she and Emily grew close in a way that neither of them had let themselves grow close to anybody in years. And Cole and the club stayed. They'd never claimed to be heroes. Cole was firm about that, always whenever anybody in town tried to thank him. "We didn't save anybody," he'd say. "We just made sure nobody had to stand alone. There's a difference." But they stayed. And Raven Creek, which had once locked its doors when it heard motorcycles coming, learned to wave instead. Because the town understood now what Emily had understood since that first morning, that the man they had all been taught to fear had turned out to be the man who stood up when nobody else would, and the men they'd been taught to trust had turned out to be the ones robbing them blind. Emily asked Cole once near the end of that first year, sitting on Ruth's porch the way they had 100 times, whether it had been worth it. All of it. The danger, the threats, the enemy he'd made of a powerful man, the risk to his whole club for a waitress he hadn't even known. Cole was quiet for a long time before he answered. 40 years I carried my sister around with me, he finally said. 40 years of wondering what would have happened if just one person in that room had stood up, if just one person had said, "That's enough," and meant it. He looked out at the darkening street. And then I walked into a diner for eggs and coffee, and I watched a man slap a woman to prove he was strong, and I watched a whole room look at their coffee. And for the first time in 40 years, Emily, I got to be the person who stood up. His voice was rough. "You want to know if it was worth it? I've been waiting 40 years to do that. 40 years, and you gave me the chance." He turned and looked at her. "So no, it wasn't worth it. It was more than worth it. It was the thing I was put here to do, and I almost died an old man without ever getting to do it, and I owe you for that. Not the other way around." Emily didn't have any words for that, so she just reached over and took his hand, the way she had in the back room of a gas station on the first night, the way this whole broken town had somehow learned to reach for each other after years of reaching for nobody at all. And they sat there, the two of them, and watched the sun go down over a town that wasn't afraid anymore. Emily Carter had spent 31 years learning how to be invisible. She'd learned to lower her eyes, to make herself small, to pour coffee before it was asked for, to never say the wrong thing to the wrong person. She'd built her whole life around the single belief that the safest thing a person could be was quiet and unnoticed and alone. And it had taken one slap across the face in a crowded diner to teach her that everything she'd believed was a lie. Because the quietest person in the room, it turned out, was not the weakest. The waitress everybody overlooked was not powerless. And a badge, a title, a reputation built on fear, none of it made a man untouchable. It only made him look untouchable to people who believed they had to face him alone. Richard Hayes had wanted to prove that Sunday morning that one person meant nothing, that a quiet waitress could be slapped and humiliated and put back in her place, and the world would keep right on turning and nobody would say a word. Instead, he'd created the one person who would bring his entire world down. He'd raised his hand to prove that no one would ever stand against him. And in doing it, he taught a whole town how to stand. That was the truth Emily Carter carried with her for the rest of her life, and the truth she gave to every frightened person who ever sat across from her in a diner booth. Power built on fear is the weakest thing in the world because it depends on people never discovering how many of them there are. Real strength doesn't come from a badge or a title or a raised hand. It comes from the person who refuses to look away. It comes from the one who's brave enough to be first. And sometimes more often than anyone in Raven Creek would ever have believed, the quietest person in the room is the one who changes everything.